Welcome back to Beyond the Comfort Zone, talking shit with KING-KAMBUF. Today, we are diving deep into the professional archives. We're really getting into the documents and the disciplines that separate a truly organized, profitable practice from, well, from chaos.
From the projects that just bleed money and time.
Yeah.
That's right. Today, we are zeroing in on a really foundational text from the KING-KAMBUF architectural records.
Which one are we on?
We're on Architectural Records and Professional Practices of the Services of KING-KAMBUF's Architecture Design Studios issue, Project Management, or PjM 16.
Okay.
And the subtitle is PjM Project Risk Register and Mitigation Strategies. This is really the manual. It's all about identifying, tracking, and, most importantly, proactively managing those project-specific risks.
Yeah, and when you say risk register, I think for a lot of people, the immediate mental image is bureaucracy. It's just another spreadsheet that some corporate PMO is forcing on you.
A box-ticking exercise.
Exactly. And our mission today is to completely flip that perception. We want to show you that the risk register is, or at least should be, a living, breathing project management instrument. It's a strategic shortcut to being proactive.
It is. It's a tool for foresight. If you're only documenting risks after they've already blown up and become claims, you've already failed. You've completely missed the point of PjM. The whole idea is preemptive intervention.
And it's so crucial to understand that this tool, it doesn't live in a silo, right? It's not just a PjM thing. It really dictates your entire firm's operating framework.
It has to.
If you handle risk well, it just cascades. It impacts your practice management, your PCM, it impacts your financial health, your legal posture, everything.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the interconnectedness. A really robust approach to risk, where you consistently identify and mitigate things,
Right.
that tells your firm what kind of insurance you need.
Right.
It tells you how to structure your fees to account for known complexities on a tricky project. It defines your firm's risk tolerance, and that's pure practice management.
And then inevitably, because on any major project, something will go sideways.
Something always does.
When those risks do materialize, you suddenly find yourself in the world of CE construction administration and evaluation. And if you've got that disciplined documentation from the risk register, you have the proof you need.
The proof you need to manage changes, to defend against claims, and to demonstrate, crucially, that you upheld the professional standard of care.
So the documentation trail that you start in that register, it's the thread connecting the very first scope conversation to, a potential legal defense 5 years down the road.
It is. And for anyone out there studying for their professional licensing exams, you have to remember this. Risk management questions almost always reward answers that are focused on a defined, accountable process.
Right.
The winning move is never wait and see. It's always a combination of these four things: document, communicate, assign, and plan. That sequence, that's the professional posture you have to adopt.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's get into the anatomy and the philosophy of the risk register itself. At its most basic level, what are we even documenting here? What's the philosophical commitment you're making when you start this?
The commitment is transparency. It's transparency about uncertainty. That's all it is. The register is a shared, documented list of all those uncertainties that could negatively affect the core project constraints.
The big ones.
The big ones: your scope, your schedule, your budget, quality, or, safety. It's about taking that nagging worry that's in the back of the PM's mind and putting it on paper so the whole team, and critically, the client, can see it and act on it.
You said earlier that the value isn't the spreadsheet itself. You can download a template anywhere.
Yeah.
So why is the process so critical? What's the real value proposition here?
The true value is the repeatable decision-making loop it forces you into. It's a cycle. Most at PMs, they recognize risks intuitively. They have a gut feeling, but the register formalizes that intuition. It turns it into a structured, trackable, and assignable process. It ensures every risk isn't just noted, but it's actively managed until it's resolved. It's the difference between seeing a symptom and actually prescribing a treatment.
Okay, let's detail that loop, that operational rhythm, because this 6-step process you're talking about sounds like the engine of proactive PM. What's step one, and why does it so often go wrong?
Step one is simply to identify the risks. And it goes wrong because people wait too long. They think it's a one-time thing at the start of the project.
But it's not.
No. Risk isn't static, it evolves. You have to be continuously scanning the horizon. At schematic design, you're looking at big site and code risks. By the time you're in CDs, you're focused on coordination and constructability risks. The key is starting early and making risk identification a recurring agenda item in your meetings.
Okay, so you've got a list. Maybe 20 potential risks. How do you decide which ones get your attention this week versus next month? That brings us to step 2, right? Assess.
This is pure triage. You have to assess the likelihood and the impact. If you skip this, you end up spending valuable team hours mitigating some low-impact schedule risk, like a small delay in paint color selection.
Right, while ignoring something huge.
While ignoring a potentially catastrophic legal or structural risk that's hiding in plain sight, assessment lets you prioritize. It focuses your finite energy where the exposure is highest.
Then we get to what you call the non-negotiable part. Step 3. Assign ownership. We've all seen this fail. Why does this whole thing collapse if you delegate a risk to, say, the design team or the MEP department?
It's the diffusion of responsibility. It's a classic psychological trap. If 10 people are vaguely responsible for something, 0 people are actually accountable for it.
Nobody owns it.
Nobody owns it. We need a single human owner, one person. That person is on the hook for tracking the trigger, for reporting the status, and for making sure the mitigation action actually got done. No single owner equals no management. It's just a worry on a page.
So once that owner's assigned, they move to step 4, which is the actual strategy. Plan responses. This is where they choose from those 4 key strategies.
Exactly. Avoid, mitigate, transfer, or accept. That's the strategic choice that directs all the subsequent work.
Then step 5 is where the real PM discipline kicks in. Track triggers and reassess at key milestones.
Right, because a mitigation plan is useless if you don't know when to pull the trigger on it. You need defined early warning signs. What changes in the project environment tell you that this risk is no longer a possibility, but is now imminent?
And finally, step 6, which is all about legal protection and standard of care. Document actions.
This is your evidence trail. You are building a professional record. You have to document what was done, when it was done, who approved it, and what the resultant or residual risk is. If a claim comes up 5 years later, you can pull this out and prove definitively that you identified the uncertainty, you assessed it professionally, and you acted according to a protocol.
Okay, so let's deconstruct the register itself now, the actual columns in the spreadsheet. You called it mini contract administration, which I love, because the structure forces you to link problems to accountable actions. So beyond just a risk ID and a description, what are the essential, exam-relevant fields you need?
You have to start with categorization. It immediately tells you who to talk to. Is it a scope of risk, a schedule risk, budget, code permitting, consultant, site? The category points you to the right person or the right part of the project plan.
And then we get specific with what you call the critical flow, cause, event, impact. Why go through that 3-part definition instead of just writing down permit delay?
Because permit delay is too vague to do anything about.
Yeah.
It forces you to define the whole scenario.
So break that down for us.
Okay, the cause is the underlying condition. For example, the city planning department has publicly announced a 4-month backlog. That's a fact.
Okay.
The event is the specific failure point. So our submittal misses the deadline because of the backlog and gets rejected, which forces a full resubmittal.
And the impact.
The impact is the measurable consequence. So a 6-tick schedule slip and, say, $15,000 in additional permitting fees and consultant time. That level of specificity lets the whole team verify the risk and plan for it with real budget and schedule float.
That makes perfect sense.
Hey.
So once you have that solid description, you move to quantification. You're turning this subjective fear into objective data. We use probability P and impact I scores, usually on a 1 to 5 scale.
That scale is essential. And look, P and I are subjective ratings, but they have to be internally consistent for your project. We should probably define what those numbers mean. A probability of 1 is nearly impossible, right? While a 5 means almost certain.
And for impact?
An impact of 1 is a negligible administrative inconvenience, but an impact of 5. That's a catastrophic failure of scope, budget, or safety. It could kill the project.
And you made a critical point here, a nuance, splitting the impact score. Why separate the cost impact from the schedule impact?
Because they're not always linked. A risk might be resolved quickly but cost a fortune. So that's a low schedule impact but a high cost impact.
Or the other way around.
Or the other way around. A minor redesign could add months to the process with very little added fee. Low cost, but a severe schedule impact. By splitting them, into I cost and I schedule, you avoid masking a disaster. Then you generate the score, or exposure, which is P, multiplied by whichever impact score is higher. That final number dictates where you put your resources.
And we have to reiterate the risk owner, the human factor.
One person.
One person, not a committee, not a department. And that person is tracking the rest of the entry. They're tracking the response strategy, the specific mitigation actions with due dates, and, maybe most importantly, the trigger or early warning sign.
Give me an example of a trigger.
Okay, so maybe your trigger for that permit risk is if the city inspector fails to return your initial call within 3 business days, that's the trigger. That tells you the risk of a delay is escalating, and you need to activate the next step in your plan. And finally, the measure of success, which is the residual risk.
The residual risk is the P times I score after you've implemented your mitigation plan. So if your initial exposure was a 20, a real red zone risk, and you implement a plan that makes it less likely and less impactful, your new residual score might be a 6, a yellow zone risk. The whole goal of this entire exercise is to actively drive that exposure score down to an acceptable level.
Let's make this tangible with a mental image. The heat map, that classic 5x5 matrix. How does visualizing risk this way help a PM focus their limited resources?
The heat map is probably the best communication tool you have for prioritization. You have probability running up the side, low to high, and impact running across the bottom, low to high.
Good.
When you plot those P times I scores on the grid, anything that falls into that top right quadrant, the scores of 16, 20, 25, that's your red zone. That's the stuff that demands immediate high resource allocation. It requires dedicated action plans within the next week. The visual just immediately tells the PM and the client, we stop what we're doing and we fix this first.
So it turns this complex calculation into a simple, color-coded mandate. The red zone isn't just monitored, it is actively managed down to orange or yellow.
That's the entire function of the register in one visual.
Okay, so we've identified and quantified the risk, now we have to act. You've emphasized that mitigation is procedural. It's not a wish, it's not be careful, it's a detailed assigned process. So let's define the 4 strategic options available to that risk owner.
Right. These are sometimes called the 4 Ts or the 4 As, depending on the textbook. But they are the strategic choices for dealing with that exposure score we just calculated.
Let's start with avoid. This feels like the ideal choice, but it's probably the most disruptive, right?
It often is. To avoid a risk, you have to eliminate the condition that causes it entirely. It means changing your scope, your technology, your design approach so that uncertainty just doesn't exist anymore.
So an example would be,
let's say you're specifying a cutting-edge imported curtain wall system. It carries a high risk of supply chain delays, cost overruns, installation issues. You avoid that risk by redesigning with a regionally sourced, proven material system. You're trading that design ambition for schedule certainty.
okay. Next up is mitigate. This seems like the bread and butter of the PM role.
It is. Mitigation is any action you take to reduce the probability of the event happening or to reduce the severity of the impact if it does happen, or ideally both. This is where all our procedural changes live. Adding extra QA/QC steps, increasing coordination meetings, commissioning more site investigation. It's the most common strategy because it lets the project move forward, but with added safeguards.
Then there's transfer. This is about shifting the risk to another party who's better equipped or contracted to handle it.
Correct. Transfer happens through legal and financial instruments. The most common forms are shifting the means and methods risk to the contractor via contract language. That's what the AIA documents are designed to do.
Or insurance.
Or shifting financial risks via insurance policies. Professional liability, builder's risk, things like that. Another really frequent one is delegated design, where you shift the technical risk of a specialized system, like a complex truss system or a curtain wall, to the specialty consultant or the subcontractor who designs and builds it.
And finally, the one that can sound like giving up, but is often a very calculated business decision. Accept.
Right. To accept a risk means you consciously choose to proceed because the cost or the disruption of avoiding or mitigating it is actually greater than the exposure score itself.
You only do this when the probability is really low, I assume.
Very low, or when the cost of fixing it, if it happens, is fully covered by an owner's contingency fund. But critically, acceptance is always paired with 2 things: monitoring and a specific contingency plan. You have a known budget reserve or a pre-designed backup option ready to go the moment that touch fires. You're not ignoring it, you're just deciding to live with it, but you're fully prepared.
Let's get into some of those procedural mitigations. If we're serious about being proactive, we need specific, actionable examples. Take permit risk. It's the bane of almost every project schedule.
Yeah.
What does procedural mitigation actually look like?
It looks like front-loading your regulatory compliance. Instead of just submitting and hoping, you initiate a formal pre-application meeting with the authority to per stuctor fee. having jurisdiction, the AHJ, really early in the design phase. You submit an early code memo to lock down interpretations. You build explicit schedule float times specifically reserved in your timeline for review cycles and resubmittals. You're reducing the probability of surprise by getting their buy-in upfront.
Scope creep risk. The slow, painful erosion of profit on a project. What documents specifically mitigate this?
The mitigation here is a disciplined firewall. You have to have a formal scope matrix that defines every single deliverable. Any deviation from that, no matter how small, has to be recorded through written owner decisions. If an owner asks for 5 layout changes, the PM's mitigation is to issue a formal memo using a rigid change management protocol that links that request to an immediate required adjustment in fee and schedule. You're documenting the transfer of that risk back to the client.
What about consultant coordination risk? It's inherent in any complex project, right?
Yeah.
The clashes between structure, MEP, architecture. How do you mitigate that?
With procedural control, if you're using BIM, you enforce a stringent BIM execution plan. It dictates file formats, coordinate systems, everything. You set mandatory defined model exchange dates. Everyone knows deadlines. And the PM has to enforce clash detection deadlines, running the software right after the exchange, not weeks later. You're shifting coordination from being reactive in the field to proactive in the model.
Budget risk, especially with escalation in volatile markets. How can an architect mitigate cost uncertainties that feel so out of our control?
By managing the owner's expectations and giving them tools for flexibility, you document clear escalation assumptions from day one. You proactively design in alternates to give the owner options if the base bid comes in high. And you have to maintain a transparent value engineering decision log that records every single thing that was removed or downgraded for cost reasons, and you get the owner to sign off on it.
Site unknowns. This is a massive liability area. Unexpected utilities, bad soil.
The mitigation is simple. Information is way cheaper than construction delays. You commission comprehensive surveys, you spend the money on ground-penetrating radar or GPR scanning, you do test pits, you do potholing, you physically dig to confirm where critical infrastructure is. And if you advise the owner to spend $10,000 on that upfront and they refuse, you document that refusal. You've transferred that financial risk back to them while still upholding your standard care.
And finally, what about internal quality risk? Just ensuring your own documents are buildable.
That's just administrative rigor. Mitigation means mandating milestone QA/QC checklists. 50% DD, 90% CD. It means formalized interdisciplinary reviews where consultants are required to review each other's work. It means red line control so every comment is tracked, and a formal issue tracking system so potential conflicts don't just get lost in an email chain.
Now we have to hit the professional liability issue, the standard of care caveat. You mentioned transferring risk doesn't mean you abdicate responsibility. This is a huge point of confusion for young PMs. Can you explain that boundary?
This is a deep professional liability point, and it leads to a lot of claims. So let's say we transfer the technical design of a foundation to a specialty structural engineer through delegated design. The risk is transferred, right?
Ethically, yes.
Yes, but the architect still holds the standard of care for the overall integration of that element into the project as a whole.
So what does that standard of care require us to do even after we've transferred it?
It requires us to coordinate it, to review it for conformance to the intent of our contract documents, to make sure it complies with all the code requirements that are visible to us as the architect. If that delegated foundation design clashes with the MEP layout in a way that should have been obvious during coordination, the architect shares in that liability. You have to document your communications, you have to flag potential issues. Transferring risk is never, ever an excuse to stop paying attention.
Okay, let's apply all this theory. We've got a classic development project. An urban 5-story mixed-use building. Retail on the ground floor, 48 apartments above. It's a Type ICA wood frame over a Type I concrete podium. And the key constraints, tight site and market-driven fast-track pressure.
Right, so the environment is a risk multiplier from day one. We have 4 constraints here that instantly generate high exposure. First, the jurisdiction has a known active plan check backlog. So a schedule risk is just baked in.
And the owner wants an aggressive leasing date,
which removes any schedule slack we might have hoped for.
Third, and this is often the costliest surprise, the early civil info is incomplete. So utility locations are basically a guess on this tight urban site. You can't just dig anywhere.
Exactly. And fourth, a key people risk. The consultant team includes a new-to-you MEP engineer. New relationships, especially on a complex coordination project like a podium building, they always introduce risk until you've proven their process works.
So these are the quiet killers, just lurking in the background during the design development phase. Based on that profile, what are the 3 highest priority risks we need to attack immediately?
Number one has to be the permit timeline uncertainty. It affects the entire project. Number two is the utility relocation unknowns, because that affects cost and the foundation design itself. And number three is the MEP coordination risk, because with tight floor-to-floor clearances, even small errors mean huge rework in the field.
Okay, so let's walk through the PM's process, starting at the DAD kickoff meeting. Step 1, populate the register. We have to use that specific cause event impact language for our highest priority, that utility risk.
Okay, for the utility risk, the entry would read something like this. Cause: inaccurate or unknown location mapping of high-pressure lines, like gas or water, in the adjacent public right-of-way.
Okay, the event.
Event: a conflict is discovered between that existing infrastructure and our proposed foundations or utility service lines during early site work.
And the impact.
Impact: a minimum 6-week schedule slip due to the required redesign and the utility authority's approval process, with an associated cost increase that could easily exceed $75,000.
That is actionable, specific language. So step 2 is to prioritize. If we put that utility risk on our 5x5 heat map, given the tight site and aggressive schedule, what are we talking?
The probability is high. Let's call it a 4. The impact is catastrophic, so that's a 5.
So an exposure score of 20?
A 20. That is deep in the red zone. It demands immediate action.
Okay, step 3 is assignment. For high-impact risks like these, you need specific owners. Who owns what?
The permit risk owner is the PM, working with the code consultant. The utility risk owner has to be the civil engineer, but the PM retains ownership of tracking the mitigation status. And the MEP coordination risk owner is the MEP lead, collaborating directly with the project architect.
Now, for step 4, the actionable strategies. For that permit risk, with the known backlog, what specific procedural mitigation steps are we setting deadlines for this week?
We have to move fast. Action 1. Schedule a formal pre-application meeting with the AHJ immediately. Get their initial buy-in on the tricky parts, like the Type I High A over podium design. Action 2. The PM must meet with the owner to add specific schedule floats, say 4 weeks, to the overall schedule and make that aggressive leasing date conditional. And Action 3. Review the building department's submittal sequence. Can we submit the foundation package early?
Excellent. Now for the big one, the utility risk with a score of 20. What are we commissioning? This is going to cost money up front.
You spend money to buy certainty. Action 1. The civil engineer must immediately commission specialized utility locating. This isn't desk research. This is physical verification. Potholing, GPR scanning. Action 2. The PM must issue a formal memo to the owner, escalating the cost and schedule implications of this risk and documenting the recommendation for these immediate site investigation costs. We are transferring the financial decision back to the owner based on our professional advice.
And for that MEP coordination risk, with the new consultant and tight clearances, this is all about procedural quality control.
Yes. Action 1. The PM mandates an accelerated model exchange cadence. Weekly model sharing, not monthly. Action 2. We require the MEP engineer to provide early dimension sectional cuts at all the critical interface points. Action 3. The project architect runs clash detection reports every Monday morning, and those results become the main agenda for the Tuesday coordination meeting. You create a system to force the issue.
And steps 5 and 6, documentation and integration. The register can't just be a document that sits on a server.
It has to drive your work. Action 1. All those mitigation activities, the decision to pothole, the results of the clash report, they are referenced directly in the project meeting minutes. That's your evidence trail. And Action 2. The PM has to audit the work plan and add budgeted hours for all this increased coordination and review time, or flag it as additional services, justified by this high-risk environment.
Let's tie this back to the exam structure because this is a classic scenario, the trigger fires. The contractor discovers utility conflicts during foundation excavation. What is the competent architect's immediate course of action?
This is a test of your understanding of standard of care. Your role is management and coordination. So first, you notify the owner immediately of the discovery and the immediate impact on cost and schedule. Then you document the physical conflicts. Then you immediately coordinate with the civil and structural engineers to develop viable design options for remediation. Finally, you propose those options to the owner for their decision, along with the impacts. You manage the response. You do not tell the contractor to figure it out.
Let's pause and really dig into the math behind that P times I scoring. For a PM who's juggling 20 different tasks, why is this simple calculation so powerful?
It's the only mechanism that translates all that complexity into a single measurable priority number. our time, our team's energy, the client's budget, they're all finite. We can't spend 10 hours researching some minor aesthetic risk that has an exposure of 4 when a structural risk with an exposure of 20 is looming. Key Times I forces us to make rational, resource-based decisions. It justifies why we're focused on risk A instead of risk B.
Let's solidify that. Let's run the actual numbers from our mixed-use case study using that 1 to 5 scale.
Okay. Risk A, utility relocation. We said the probability was a 4, highly likely. The cost impact was a 5, severe. So 4 times 5 gives us an exposure of 20. That's our top score.
Okay. Risk B, permit resubmittal. Probability is a 3. It's possible given the backlog. We rated the impact at a 4, a high schedule slip. So 3 times 4 is 12.
And risk C, MEP coordination rework. Probability is a 3, possible with the new consultant. Impact is a 3, moderate rework. So 3 times 3 gives us an exposure of 9.
The ranking is crystal clear. 20, 12, 9. How do those numbers translate into the practical day-to-day rhythm of the PM team? What does a 20 mean versus a 9?
The 20, that's risk A, demands aggressive action. Avoid or mitigate right now. This means reallocating project time and budget this week to commission that potholing. It justifies asking the owner for additional services funds immediately. If we fail to act on that 20, it will become a catastrophe. That is the red zone. Immediate, critical intervention.
And the score of 12 for the permit risk.
Yeah.
That needs managing, but maybe the mitigation is woven into existing tasks.
Exactly. Risk B requires high priority but integrated procedural changes. We schedule the pre-app meeting. We monitor the length of the city's review cycle. This is the orange zone, active management and control, but it's not a stop everything and panic situation.
And the score of 9 for MEP coordination.
Risk C needs a plan. We set up the weekly model exchange cadence. But if the team proves they're competent in the first 2 weeks, this risk might just transition into a monitoring stage. We don't ignore it, but we prioritize our resources on the red zone items first. If you have 5 hours this week for risk mitigation, 4 go to A and B, and 1 goes to setting up the system for C. That's the yellow zone, active monitoring and process implementation.
So the PM's weekly focus becomes a very simple conversational visual. Attack red, manage orange, monitor yellow. And that system ensures you are always focusing your team's finite energy on the highest point of exposure.
And it provides a defensible reason for your time allocation. When the client asks why you're spending $5,000 on potholing, you can point to the register, show them the exposure score of 20, and explain that failing to spend that money now exposes them to a catastrophic $75,000 delay later. It transforms the discussion from cost to value protection.
Okay, risk management isn't just a technical exercise. It's also a profound ethical responsibility. We have to discuss the ethical test case that comes up when big money is on the line. The owner pressures the PM to remove a high-impact risk. Let's say it's a plausible life safety or a critical code compliance issue from the register. They want to do it to avoid alarming investors or lenders.
This is the critical professional test. This is where the rubber meets the road. You are being pressured to misrepresent material facts for financial gain, specifically involving public health, safety, and welfare, HSW.
What is the PM's ethical and standard of care obligation in that exact moment?
The ethical mandate is non-negotiable. You do not conceal material risks, full stop, especially not risks tied to HSW or core code compliance. Your documentation has to remain professional, factual, and transparent. The only response is to keep the risk documented, clearly communicate the impacts, propose mitigation steps, and document the owner's acknowledgement of that risk.
Yet if the owner keeps pushing and tells you to falsify the record,
You have to escalate immediately, internally to the principal in charge, or to the firm's legal counsel. The firm cannot afford to be complicit in concealing a material risk like that. Maintaining your professional integrity and an honest record protects you, it protects the firm, even if the owner ultimately chooses a path that increases their own risk exposure.
let's apply this professional posture to a common test scenario. Scenario Q4. During DD, the owner requests repeated design changes, 3 major changes in 1 week, without acknowledging the fee or schedule impacts. What's the PM's best move?
That is scope creep risk, activated by poor client discipline. You can't just absorb this work, and you can't wait until the bid phase when it's too late. The best move is procedural. You document the changes formally, you issue a memo detailing the cumulative impacts on scope, fee, and schedule, and you request a formal signed adjustment to the contract. You enforce the change management protocol. That process is what prevents your profit from just evaporating.
Another classic quality control test, Q8. The contractor proposes a major material substitution, a new roofing membrane, let's say. It looks equal, but it lacks the long-term performance data that's required by your spec. The schedule is tight, and they want a quick answer. What's the best PM posture?
This tests that tension between schedule pressure and professional due diligence. You can't just approve it to avoid a delay, but you can't reject it out of hand either. The key is balance and documentation. The standard of care move is to evaluate the substitution for conformance to the intent of the documents, document your concerns about the lack of long-term data, and formally advise the owner of the associated risks and potential long-term impacts. The ultimate decision to accept that risk lies with the owner, but you, as the architect, have to provide the professional analysis that enables an informed decision.
Which brings us back to the core test day tactics for PjM questions. If you're faced with one of these procedural scenarios, how do you filter the answers to find the most professionally sound one?
Always remember, PjM questions reward accountability and documentation. If two answers look similar, pick the one that explicitly includes the administrative rigor. Ask yourself, does it assign an owner? Does it define a specific next action? Does it set a deadline? Does it communicate the impact to the right person?
And the overarching goal is always to reduce uncertainty at the earliest possible moment.
Absolutely. The professional answer is the one that forces clarification and gets the missing information fastest. Schedule the pre-app meeting. Issue the clarifying memo. Get the missing geotech info. Formalize the scope change. Just use that three-part filter. Who owns it? What's the next action? And what's the documentation trail? If the answer satisfies those three checks, you've found the right professional posture.
We've taken this deep dive from really the philosophical necessity of risk management right through to applying specific procedural steps on a complex project. Before we wrap, let's recap the highest level pinup summary.
First, the register is a living management tool. If you only review it monthly, you're doing it wrong. It should be updated weekly. Second, the best risk statements always use that actionable structure, cause, even, impact. And third, mitigation is always procedural. It's concrete action, not an abstract concept.
And most critically, remember that documenting decisions with meeting minutes, with action logs, that's the only way to prove your professional standard of care and manage future claims.
If you remember nothing else from this deep dive, just carry these 4 powerful one-liners with you. First, no owner equals no management. If you don't assign accountability, the risk is just a drift.
No trigger equals no early warning. If you don't define the warning sign, you only find out about the problem when the catastrophe is already happening.
No written action equals no mitigation. A verbal decision to fix something without a deadline and an owner is just professional negligence waiting to happen.
And finally, scope or schedule impacts must be documented and communicated early. Waiting even a week increases your liability, and it reduces the owner's ability to make an informed choice.
So here's your final action item. A way to apply this immediately and start moving beyond the comfort zone. Don't wait for your firm's template. Take what we discussed today and draft a simple risk register template for yourself. Just 10 or 15 rows with those key columns, T times I, owner, trigger, and residual risk.
Then take a project you are currently working on, maybe the one that's causing you the most stress right now, and write 5 potential risks using that mandatory cause, event, impact format. Be really specific.
And finally, just draw a rough 5x5 heat map on a piece of paper. Plot those 5 risks. Use that visual to prioritize which 2 demand immediate procedural action plans this week. Start attacking red, managing orange, and monitoring yellow right now. That proactive practice, that is the true measure of a competent project manager.
That is our deep dive into the project risk register and mitigation strategies. Thanks for joining us on Beyond the Comfort Zone Talking Shit with KING-KAMBUF. We will see you next time.